All right, welcome. So recently, Tyler Kelly, our guest here, our friend, has agreed to come and talk with us about his recent paper or a proposal he wrote called "A Path of Consent into the Law of Christ." I read it and I was absolutely thrilled. I thought the ideas were great. I do have some criticisms, some comments, and several questions. And so, what we're going to be doing today is walking through his paper. Tyler is going to walk me through it. We're going to talk about it, and then at the end, we're going to be exploring four of the questions he lays out. All right, so Tyler, let's talk about this. Why did the perfect mousetrap inspire this you to write this particular piece on the law of Christ? Let's get some background behind this.
Yeah, so I was actually there at the talk, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, while the talk was going on, I was just kind of thinking, man, like I wonder if a lot of our problems that we have, the interpersonal problems that come up, I wonder if it's because we have different operating principles running in the background. And if we're covenant Christians, we've already given consent to the law of Christ. We've already made a covenant to use the scriptures to guide and correct us. So I wonder what would happen if we took a look at that law of Christ and just kind of started some discussions on what the precepts are, what the principles are, and try to work on our own individual conversion to it so that we all have the same operating system running in the background. So
Hmm.
that was, I mean, that took a couple weeks to kind of that thought to kind of grind together and form, and then yeah, I've spent a lot of time with our fellowship, probably 7 years, looking at the Sermon on the Mount off and
Hmm.
on as a course of study.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of time to kind of look at it, and not that we're good at it, we suck,
Hmm.
but uh, we do have like a kind of a shared understanding that this is something that's important.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, that's good. And so, I like how you use the word operating system. It kind of leaves a question or brings up the question that everyone can read the same given text or hear the same message, but if they have a different operating system, or you might say a guiding principle or precept, that's going to change their cognition or change the way they perceive a given message. And that's going to leave a lot of room for misunderstanding. But if you can kind of get us all under the same or participating in the same operating system, it would clear the bridge, the gulf of misunderstanding, perhaps. And I'm thinking what you were implying here, what you're arguing is the Sermon on the Mount or the law of Christ, um, or the sermon at the temple could be that potential, um, that shared reality that we all participate in, so that we are speaking from the same grounds. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like I know between me and my wife, like we live it. Now we live
Mm-hmm.
it imperfectly, and uh by the grace of Christ, he assumes that there's going to be flaws and errors among his people that try to live the law, but his principles and precepts help us repair those flaws quickly
Hmm.
through forgiveness and reconciliation. uh, he wouldn't give those precepts if he didn't assume that there would be weakness as humans. There is weakness, so therefore he gives us some uh, guiding standards. There's a trigger word. Some guiding standards that we can self-apply to heal the relationship. So between my wife and I, we live it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I know that I'm going to be a bonehead sometimes, and I know that she'll show me grace and compassion and offer correction. And it might hurt, but I want truth, and I'll work on that, and we'll repair, and we'll
Mm.
move forward. Okay, so there's that. Now, if I was to go to a family member who's maybe in the church and in their cultural box, so the LDS church, and they don't quite have the same understanding of the Sermon on the Mount
Hmm.
and of the law, if I was to go to them with patience, forgiveness, kindness, uh, it might come off to them as being condescending,
Hmm.
or you're being self-righteous. And I think what that could be is that it's two different laws that are being lived,
Yeah.
and it's hard to see eye to eye when two different laws are lived. So there's the precepts of God and there's the precepts of men.
Hmm.
There's the bonds of peace and there's the bonds of iniquity.
Hmm.
And we get to choose which bond we have. Like right now, just by us talking about the law of Christ, we're establishing and building a relationship and building bonds that are based on Christ's law,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Well, my immediate response to that, and I want to have a conversation, we'll lead into this, about precepts, because you wrote a whole section here on precepts, and I want to kind of, you wrote here, all of us follow precepts or you put underlying principles to guide our behaviors. And the way I see precepts or underlying principles is that I see the principle as the same. It's in heaven. It's a principle that exists independent of all of us, but we all participate in it. We all adhere to it. But how it's going to look in its particularities. So there's a singular principle, but how it looks in its particular circumstances, in the situations, will be adapted. Will be will be lived out in that situation. So you have your spouse, and you can live the law of Christ with her because you are Christ-like with God. But you can also be a Christian and live the law of Christ with someone else, like a coworker or someone in your broader congregation. Obviously, it's not going to look the same as your
sure.
relationship with your spouse, but the principles guiding that are going to be adapted for that particular circumstance and that particular relationship. That's kind of
Yeah,
my
I like
understanding how I stack up the ideal and the particularity. You might, or another example, you have the gospel of Jesus Christ, and it's true, but then we're tasked with the burden, or we're given the opportunity to rise up and reconcile that heavenly reality to our particular situation in our families and our fellowships. So,
yeah, I
but
like that.
yeah.
I-
So tell me more of your understanding on what precisely is or no, actually, why don't you walk me through the first section in your own words, right now, on the section titled precepts.
Okay. So you want me to read it basically?
I want you to articulate it, explain it, explain, because that's the topic. Explain that idea of precepts. I mean, you can read it if you like to, or explain again in your own
Yeah,
words.
I'll just explain it because
Yeah,
you can read it. So I'll just
yeah.
explain it and kind of expound. You
And
know,
I'll give you my response to after you explain it. So.
okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, when you read the law of Christ, does Christ ever say, "Thou shalt not be angry with your brother. Thou shalt not lust after a woman"?
Mhm.
He doesn't articulate it as like a command. He gives it as a wise precept, and it's up to us to individually apply the precept. So this is where I would bring in the ecology a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. So in ecology, I teach jujitsu and kickboxing.
Mhm.
And with the students, we use kind of ecological methods to coach and bring out and have them emerge certain skills. Okay, so in ecology, there's constraints. So if you look at an environment, There's
Mm.
constraints in the environment that are going to dictate what's possible in the environment.
Mhm.
So if there's a spring of water, right, it's
Mhm.
going to provide, life to that area. Or if we're talking about like a river has river banks that constrain the river and guide the river through the valley,
Mhm.
and it can become lush and fertile. But if it doesn't have riverbanks, it can become a flood, right? And if it's a
Mhm.
flood, uh, it's not going to be fertile. Okay, those are constraints, and we all have constraints. Right now, we're on a time constraint. We're following this method of discussion where we have constraints of different people have different roles. Those are good. Because when we look back, we can maybe see some fruit from those constraints.
Mhm.
Well, when I talk about precepts, precepts guide just like constraints in an environment guide behavior. So,
Mhm.
can I give you an example of how I manipulated my children using constraints last weekend? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
let's hear about that. Yeah.
Okay, so my kids, we don't go to church. We do fellowship, but they still participate with the ward. Okay. And my son got invited to go to the stake dance, and he'd already been gone all day. And I said, okay, look, you can go till 9:30, but if you can convince your older sister to go with you, I'll let you stay the whole time till 11:30.
Mhm.
Okay. So he's motivated. Like, I want to go hang out all night with my friends. Well, I had already talked to my daughter, and she's like, I do not want to go, Dad. I don't want to go. Well, within like 2 minutes, my son had his friend's sister call my daughter and invite her. And within 10 minutes, the whole dynamics of our Friday evening last week changed. And it was because I applied a constraint,
Yeah.
right? But my son chose that. He didn't have to. He chose that, and then it unlocked all this stuff that happened. Okay, so what does that have to do with precepts? Precepts change our environment. Okay,
Yes.
precepts change our environment. When we meet together, and I know that you're a fellow brother in the covenant, I know that you are trying to seek Christ, and there's certain teachings that you've applied, and that is allowing certain behavior and fruit to come forth in your life and my
Mhm.
life. And it's because of those precepts that we've applied that allow us to have new behavior between us
Mhm.
emerge, right? But
Yes.
if I chose to be someone who gossiped, that's a precept that I inherited from my family. In our
Mhm.
family, we gossip. We talk
And
about
it changes the arena that you're participating in
it.
at that given moment.
Yeah. But Jesus says if you have a problem with your brother, if he trespasses against you, go with him alone, right? Go with him
Mhm.
alone and work it out. Well, just by saying that is a constraint that I put within my heart,
Mhm.
now that allows new behavior to emerge. And
Okay.
so this is
Okay.
getting to that root principle that you're talking about. I want to apply it to that because anytime I'm in a situation where, oh man, I could gossip, that constrains me to not do that. And anytime there's a constraint, there's also new opportunities for new behaviors to happen, fruit to be born.
Mm.
So
Yes.
that's ecology, but I think it's gospel too, because every kingdom has a law,
Yeah.
and every law has bounds and conditions. So I assume bounds means boundaries.
Mhm.
Those are like the thou shalt nots, and conditions are the thou shalts. This is how in Zion, in the kingdom, you should do these things.
Mhm.
So those are precepts. I mean, the Sermon on the Mount is a law, so we can
Yeah.
look at the law and say, well, what are the bounds and conditions? And obviously, it has to be applied here.
Mhm.
I can't go and externally apply it because it'll collapse, it breaks.
So
So
I'm gonna I'm going to take what you just said. It's actually the ecology metaphor or the ecology analogy maps onto dynamical systems theory. This is what a lot of people studying
Exactly.
AI and everything do. There is,
Yep.
you have the virtual governor. And you know what a governor does for a given car? It constrains. It
Hmm.
selects as well. And I want to talk about this when we discuss our questions. Governor, we automatically think of government being having a legislative body that compels us to live by certain rules. But the governor, the original word for governor, if you look up the etymological roots, comes from cybernetic theory, and it has to do with steering a ship,
Mm,
guiding the attention, the perception, guiding something,
that's
and it has that aspect to it. So you have the constraint, the top-down constraint, or the governor. Then you have the engine, because every engine has a governor, and the engine is creating variability. And what's going on in this space is that there's this interplay between the governor and the engine. And when those two are in a dynamical system, they're in an ecology, they create what you call the no, sorry, it's not the engine, it's the generator. The generator is generating potential and possibility. The governor is up here. The governor, the generator, when they work together, they create the virtual engine.
mm,
Really cool concept. But when we look at scripture and we think about these ideas, we automatically put our Western mind on where we want to divide everything analytically into neat little categories. And we think that
mhm.
salvation is very very individualistic, which it is. You have control over your own agency and how you respond. But a lot of what I'm seeing in the Sermon on the Mount is it's about protecting or creating, you might say, the sacred space of community.
Yeah.
Um, the law of Christ, law in Greek, comes from the word nomos, which doesn't necessarily imply a legislative body in Washington, D.C. that creates these rules to follow. Law means, nomos means ways and customs. It's a culture, it's a way of life. And you can think about an
Exactly.
ecology as a culture that,
Yep.
cultivates certain
Yes.
things.
So
So, mm-hmm,
I see the law of Christ.
mm-hmm,
Christ is laying out a path to create the environment.
mm-hmm,
Okay. If we all could be converted and have the law on our hearts like it's prophesied, right? That
mm-hmm,
law could be written here, and we follow those constraints or precepts or commandments. It allows to emerge an environment, a culture, a
mm-hmm.
family, a kingdom.
Yes.
It allows that. Here's the problem though, is we have 2,000 years of uh Christian interpretation, which has kind of turned it into moral idealism.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's
Hegel.
a problem. But Christ isn't
Mm-hmm,
saying this is the ideal. He's offering a precept. He's saying, apply this precept from now
mm-hmm,
on, right?
mm-hmm.
It's been said of old, you shouldn't kill. But I'm telling you, whoever's angry with his brother in his heart, right, is in danger of hell, right?
Yeah.
That's not ideal. It's a constraint. It's a pre.
Mm-hmm.
I'm holding myself to that standard. Uh, so yeah. Do you want me to give you an example of something that I think maybe would change our whole culture?
Yeah, let's
This is
hear it.
ambitious.
Mm.
So the next passage, I'm going to go to Matthew.
Yeah.
Matthew chapter 3, okay? So I'm not misquoting it. And I like the covenant of Christ wording, but I'm going to use Matthew. So I'm in Matthew chapter 3,
Mm-hmm,
and I was just referring to the anger, right? The anger is out. And then it says, if you shall come unto me, so this is verse 19,
mm-hmm.
or shall desire to come unto me, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there you remember that your brother has anything against you, leave there your gift before the altar, and go your way unto your brother, and first be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. So that's a precept. If we said the precept changes the environment when we apply it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would happen if we say, hey, the altar is it's communal worship, it's the sacrament, it's
Mm-hmm.
conference, it's any it's any worshiping when you're coming to him and you remember, oh, somebody has something against me. It's more important that you go and reconcile and repair
Mm-hmm.
than worship.
Mm-hmm.
That's more important.
Mm-hmm.
I I guess the question would be, why is that more important?
Mm.
Well,
I
if we applied that precept, what would that do to our sacrament and our worship experiences if we applied that precept? Yeah, Adam.
Adam,
yeah,
yeah.
so I think I've got some insight there. I think not only is it thought of perhaps or could be more important than coming together at the altar and having communion there. It's also about whatever energy that needs to happen to take place in order to sort out whatever it is that reveals the reconciliation with the brother. That needs to be handled outside of the environment of the communal aspect so that
Right.
you don't bring in whatever is outside so that you can maintain your sacred space. You keep your community without it being under siege, so to say. I think that's part of it is protecting that environment, that shared community, that shared worship, that shared living environment, living this law of Christ. And so perhaps it is necessary to work out, I guess, the kinks in our relationships prior to coming to the altar so that we can maintain that shared energy and that shared love. And so it can build outside of it and then all come together as more as the sum is greater than its parts in that shared space. Once we've all worked out our kinks individually, I guess. Yeah.
Can I add something too with that scripture and going back to your paper, second section? I still want to come back to the first section on precept, but the law of Christ, since we're into it now. You shared you shared 5 scriptures. You shared the one you just shared about being reconciled if you're going to come unto me and remember that thy brother has anything against thee, go thy way into thy brother and first be reconciled to him. You shared, agree with an adversary quickly while you run away with them, or accept accountability to moments brought to your attention. Accept life's injustice gratefully when someone hits you on your right cheek, and then love your enemies and bless them that curse you. And I really like the language in your explanations. I highlighted them. For that first scripture, you said offenses will arise, misconduct will occur for the second one, harm will occur. There will be times when others curse and oppose you. This is all taken in light of the law of Christ. And so there's this messy language. Not your language is messy, but you're describing some messy sort of situation. Very human. And I want
Yeah.
to suggest a way to read the law of Christ that actually fits really well with this language. And it's to read the law of Christ as if it's a 3-part temple, a 3-part room temple space, where you have the law of Moses being the ulam or the
Yeah.
courtyard. Then when you get to the law of the prophets verses, you're in the Holy of Holies, the middle room. And then when you have the conversation at the veil and you ask and you shall receive, and there's these discussions of tokens, men ask for bread, will he give him a stone? Do you ask for fish, will he give him a serpent? And you pass through the straight and narrow, tree,
Yeah.
stone, all of that imagery. That's the Holy of Holies. For those listening, I'm referencing the work of Dave Butler, who wrote a book called In the Language of Adam, and he lays out that framework of the sermon at the temple being literally a liturgical temple text for initiates to contemplate their temple endowment or their cosmic journey to Christ. Oh, anyways, okay. So those scriptures you shared, the first 4, and the language you use to describe it, very messy language. In the first room of the temple, which is the open courtyard, there's a lot of, you could say,
Mm.
somewhat chaotic. There's sacrifices being made. There's animals in there. There's, I believe it was called a thresh. Dave Butler said it's a threshing floor, and so there's just this lot of back and forth, kind of messy, and you have to sort of take care of that stuff in the courtyard before you enter into the middle room or the holy place.
Yeah.
And so when I read that and I read your language, I'm like, man, he's describing this aligns with my liturgical reading of the text. So I wanted to share that insight. What do you make of that, Tyler?
I think we've read a lot of the same stuff.
Okay, okay.
I think we've read a lot. I have my my Orthodox books here. I have Dave Butler over there. I have Margaret Barker over there. So we should probably share a common library. So I see this sermon also working from the inside out.
Yeah.
Right. Watching the thoughts
Mm-hmm.
before they become words and actions.
Mm-hmm.
And then Christ also repair laws for when we mess up.
Yeah.
Right. I'm human, so I'm gonna mess up from time to time, and so the precepts guide me to come back. So, which is awesome.
Yeah.
You know, go ahead.
Oh, and then you went to the second part. Oh, the fifth chapter you shared was actually from the second room, and it has more to. I've noticed that's about condemning others and the way you perceive things. I want to jump back to the precept thing real quick for a little bit, because you mentioned how it's both community, common union, or trying to have everyone have common union, so we're trying to be guided by the same precept, but it's also individual too. And there's this idea that precepts change. When you adopt a precept, it changes the way you think and see. And so I want to, and it changes the way we would even read our own scriptures. So I want to pitch this idea to you, Tyler, about precepts and see if we have a similar understanding. And I'm going to get a little philosophical, and I'm going to talk a little bit of history here. We're going to talk about the last 2,000 years of the precepts of men and how they've been fickle. So early 1800s, the abolitionist movement came on the scene. And this was spearheaded by evangelicals, typically. And that brought about the end of slavery. It was a lot less of a bloody ordeal in England than it was in America. The British did it over the course of 100 years. Americans did it really quickly and had a civil war. But that movement was led by the evangelicals. Now, there's a lot of political debate between conservatives and liberals as to what precept or what idea actually brought the end of slavery. The conservatives will argue that it was a Christian ethic, that it was Christianity that brought the end of the slavery, the abolitionist movement. The liberals will say it wasn't that; it was actually humanism ideals that came out of the Renaissance, and it was the Enlightenment thinking that was going against the conserved order at the time that brought about the end of slavery. And there is some weight into that argument, and I tend to fall in the middle because I think technology does play a key role in that. And I do think the principles or precepts that brought about the abolition were always there at the beginning of Christianity, but weren't realized until the 1800s. So here's some precepts and how they guide perception. So early Christianity, 400, 500, 600 to about 1200, right before the Renaissance, they were completely okay in the Inquisitions, in justifying benevolent torture if it meant that you would convert to the church. Because what is a few minutes of torture on earth for a lifetime of salvation? That was the justification made by the theologian Augustine. And the reason why Augustine, and he's super influential in the West, is he got a hold of he read the works of Plato, Platonism in a sense. And what Plato, hang with me, what Plato is describing, the way that Plato views man is very, very ignorant, very dumb, and very in need of somewhat strict, heavy discipline to guide them in the correct direction. In the Republic, he gives this story of the myth of Gyges, where this guy finds a magical ring and he puts the ring on and it makes him invisible. And what does the guy do when he has the ring that makes him invisible? He goes around and rapes everyone and gets political power and becomes the king of this local jurisdiction by finding the ring that makes him invisible. See where Tolkien got his influence or his inspiration. But then Plato also has gives another account in the Plato's cave allegory, in which we all love the. Did you know the Plato's cave allegory, Tyler?
Yeah.
I've always read it as this great story of coming into the light and taking off the shackles. But Plato, there was a little subtle turn in the story there that people don't typically notice. That the person shackled to the wall had to be drug up against their will, compelled and forced out of the cave into the light. So Plato's painting this really dismal picture of people. And then in the Republic, he talks about the three classes of men: gold, silver, and bronze, and how the golden people are the philosopher kings of society, and the rest of the masses are dumb demos. Demo means democracy. That means they're drones. They can't think for themselves. And so society needs philosopher kings to rule over the dumb idiots. And that's what Augustine reads. He picks that up and he's like, yeah, people are too stupid to think for themselves. They must be compelled to become Christians. And so that's kind of the ideological engine that drives the West throughout the whole Dark Ages. So you see there's one precept there, and Augustine is possessed by this precept, and now he justifies, well, mankind are just filthy and disgusting because of original sin. And he has this whole worldview that everyone's born into sin and they're punished for Adam's transgression, and the point of life is suffering. And then, so I'm giving you like a 5-minute history lesson. Then in 1085 AD, the Christian world reclaims the city of Toledo or Tolilo from the Muslim world, and they get this library. And from this library, they discover the works of Aristotle. Now, if you know your Greek history, Aristotle and Plato, they kind of got beef. But Plato somehow made it through the Dark Ages. Aristotle got lost to the Arabs, but it came back when the Christian world reclaimed that library. And Aristotle gives a completely different understanding of human nature. He says this on the book of Metaphysics. He says, all men by nature desire to know, an indication that it is the delight we take in our senses. So he starts right off the back on his greatest work that people desire to know. They don't need to be drug out of the cave. That people have this natural inclination for goodness. And so this is a matter of how people view each other. And so Thomas Aquinas gets Aristotle, creates his work Summa Theologica, and it can be argued that work, that building the entire theology from that viewpoint that men inherently are good and want to know things, spurns about the Renaissance, which brings about Galileo, which brings about Enlightenment thinkers, which brings about John Locke. And John Locke has this Lockean view of Christianity. And so what the liberals will argue is, oh, yeah, the evangelicals who are bringing about the abolitionist movements, they're only reading the New Testament and deriving these truths that are self-evident about human nature, but they're reading from a Lockean lens. They're reading from that Enlightenment lens. And so I share all this because you can see how precepts change the way we read a given text and understand something.
Yep.
So does that make sense? Does that jive with what a precept is? And they're more subtle.
Yeah, I mean, I might exactly, and I might have a little bit different vocabulary, but we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you about ethics. How would you define ethics?
Your ethics. Oh, okay. Did I use the word ethics? I was trying to not use the word epistemology and metaphysics. Ethics is what you would describe or what you would believe is the good. That would be the study of ethics. What is good? And that's the kind of the underlying question behind driving ethics. And then
so maybe we can kind of look at this a little bit. In the law of Christ, is when Christ gives us the law, is he describing ethics, or is he describing something else? Like, if you do something that offends me, Christ thought that I need to govern the reaction in
Yeah.
my heart.
Hmm.
Is that ethics or is that something else?
Say that again. What is Christ? Ask the question one more time.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of different ways to put it, but you do something, it offends me. Maybe you're overbearing or you're pushy or something, and it offends me, which you haven't been. Okay,
Uh-huh.
in the law of Christ, I'm supposed to govern the reaction within me. I'm not
Oh,
supposed to take offense.
yeah.
Is that an ethic? I don't know that it's an ethic. It's something
So
way bigger.
I would say the ethic is determined by, you might say, the worldview. The philosophical term is the metaphysics or the epistemological framework. So the ethic is what is good, but it's also implied what you ought to do. So
Mm,
what is Philippa Foot, big philosopher? She talks about what is good for a lion to have teeth, right? And so if you take away the teeth of a lion, you are killing that. You are destroying what is good for that lion because that lion cannot pursue its good.
okay,
So
so
ethics are
what
determined
if
by the reality, you could say, or by the structure, by the ecology that they find themselves in. That's the argument Philippa
right?
Foot makes is it depends on the arena or the environment that will determine what is good.
So what if Christ? Yes, that is at play in the
Mm-hmm.
sermon, but what if in the sermon he gives us precepts that when we self apply them allows new behavior to bear fruit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so if you go to TNC 86,
Yeah.
it's that passage I've quoted a couple times. It's the old olive leaf revelation.
Mm-hmm.
So 86, and just to preface this a little bit, I want to propose that the law of Christ is enforced, and that's a pretty strong word. It's enforced by reciprocity.
Mm.
Okay, if I can't use retaliation, I can't condemn you, I can't judge you. Okay, those are off the table. They would break the law of Christ. All I have is persuasion, influence, long
Mm-hmm.
suffering. All I have is treating you with love and kindness. And we've all had somebody do something amazing for us, like give us a gift out of nowhere, and
Mm-hmm.
you feel that tug in your heart, like, man, I need to do something for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think reciprocity could be one thing that holds the whole system together. And I want to invite you guys to consider this verse as we read it. Is this what that verse means? So this is TNC 86:6. Does somebody else want to read it?
Adam, will you read that?
Yeah, sure. All kingdoms have a law given, and there are many kingdoms, for there is no space in the which there is no kingdom, and there is no kingdom in which there is no space, either a greater or lesser kingdom. And unto every kingdom is given a law, and unto every law there are certain bounds also and conditions. All beings who abide not in those conditions are not justified. For intelligence cleaves unto intelligence, wisdom receives wisdom, truth embraces truth, virtue loves virtue, light cleaves unto light. Mercy has compassion on mercy and claims her own. Justice continues its course and claims its own. Judgment goes before the face of him who sits upon the throne and governs and executes all things. He comprehends all things, and all things are before him, and all things are round about him, and he is above all things, and in all things, and is through all things, and is round about all things, and all things are by him, and of him even God forever and ever.
Yes. So This is how Christ acts. He's a being who abides the bounds and conditions of the Father's law, and therefore when he shows wisdom, he calls that wisdom forth in others. When he truth, he calls that forth. So if we can emulate him, even though people are, maybe rough with us and treating us like enemies, if we give love, eventually love wins, because it's the
Yeah.
law of reciprocity. If
Well,
somebody messes up and I show mercy, kindness, love, compassion, I don't have to criticize them or threaten to kick them out of the movement. I show love and mercy. The law of reciprocity, if that's what you want to call it, it invites them to also do the same. And I'm not
so
coercing or forcing them to do it.
the way I see it, I
What do you
think
guys
of
think?
that reciprocity thing. I think that's what love is. So love, the agapic sense of love. So I view it when you have a child. My wife and I are expecting our first kid this May. So I'm going to learn this
All right.
firsthand. I've read about it. Children, babies, they have souls, right? But when they come from the hospital, they're not full-fledged mature adults. So they're not
Right.
persons in that sense. You wouldn't expect them to make mature decisions. That's why you have to raise them, and they have to go through certain benchmarks and key periods of life. But the way you do that, and this is what agapic love is you give to them. You kind of, so there's a framework C.S. Lewis talks about with the four loves, and there's eros, which is the word for erotic, but it's a really bad. We automatically think of shmup novels when we hear that, but eros means a consumptive love. I'm consuming, bringing it into me. It's eros, and there's a time and place for that. The kind of love a child has for their mom and dad is eros in that sense, because they are consuming, they are they are fully dependent on the parent. But the kind of love the parent gives is this agapic charity type love, because by loving that child, they mature into adulthood, they become something new. That's agapic love. And so this ties into something we've been talking about in our fellowship concerning endowment or dowry or forgiving. When you forgive, you give beforehand. And we
Mm.
use the story of Jean Valjean in Victor Hugo's book, Les Mis. When Jean
Yeah.
Valjean steals the priest's belongings, he gets captured and he gets taken back, and the police are like, "This guy stole from you." And the priest says, "Oh, you forgot my brother to take the best," and he gives him the candles. In the book, he says something really profound. He says, after he excuses the police, he says, "Now, brother, I have purchased your soul from purgatory. You must use this opportunity, this gift, to become a better man." And then that spurns the whole story. But what is happening in that scenario is the priest doesn't see, even though Jean Valjean is acting like a despicable, looting thief, the priest doesn't see that reality. Just like a parent, when they see their child, they see that child, but a good father will see what that child is capable of. And so the father is always trying to cultivate that child's potential. That's what the priest does. And the priest does that through, well, that's the sacrificial act of it, giving up himself, giving beforehand. He's giving beforehand in respects to the person he's giving the gift to, creating a space for that person to develop, because he sees that being as a god in embryo. So back to your reciprocal aspect. You can treat someone that's acting like a buffoon, and if you treat them like a buffoon, it's going to create that feedback, and they're just going to act like a beast and a buffoon, perhaps like what Plato does, and Augustine. When you treat people like animals, they behave like animals. But if you take the Aristotelian ethic, the Aquinas ethic, you treat people like they're dignified, they're worthy of respect. All men are created equal. They're endowed with certain inalienable rights from God. They actually live up to it. And it kind of breaks our Western mind, but I believe that's how it works, and that's what we're called to do in the law of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was really good.
Hmm.
Paul's letter to the Corinthians, the Corinthians had a lot of spiritual gifts. Okay,
Hmm.
they were blessed, and they had a lot of problems too.
Hmm.
Some of the problems that we have, they had, and as Paul is writing and correcting, he gives I don't know what it is in our scriptures, but the 1 Corinthians 13 charity passage.
Hmm.
And I suspect that Paul is inviting them to repent, and return to the law of Christ's precepts
Hmm.
that promote peace, but not just promote it. The law governs peace. Christ's law governs how peace can be had in a community, so that let's say one relationship over here, it doesn't cast shade and mess up everyone's relationship. It guides this relationship to repair and heal and allow peace to rule and govern. So I would suggest that Paul, when he gives the charity passage, he's just recasting the sermon in terms of love.
Yeah.
Okay. Because if we look at it, it doesn't envy, it doesn't itself up, it doesn't keep track of wrongs, it suffers long. He's going through the sermon and showing that if we follow the sermon, those precepts, it allows us to develop and have emerge within our soul the love, the
Hmm.
charity. Uh, and it's not, yes, it is a spiritual endowment, but all spiritual endowments are triggered by obedience to the laws and the precepts, right? It's the science of theology, like the old,
Hmm.
what was his name, Orson Pratt. Like, this is science. You follow these laws, and certain effects happen.
Hmm. Huh. Okay. That's good. Is it okay
Yeah.
if we pivot?
Action.
I want to ask you one
Oh,
question. Well, oh, Adam, do you have a question? Because I was thinking we start moving to the
um,
questions.
not a question, just a comment. I mean, yeah, action gives space for reaction. So you have action and consequence. You have in music, you have call and response. It's always this something initiates and something reacts to what is initiated. And so I see that reciprocity um, of needing to be equal, needing the thing that is initiated to be equally given back, rather than there being an injustice between the things. And so this balance then occurs that allows the peace to be had where things are equally both given and received.
In
Um,
in
I guess in
filmmaking,
music.
that's the planting and payoff, or even just storytelling in general. Planting, payoff.
Mhm.
Gotta it's gotta be equal and good.
And I think it's
Yeah.
well, and then to use the language of ecology or dynamical systems theory or the cognitive science that we've been discussing, Chris, it's this when you act and you react, that's what love is. Love requires a back and forth, a toing and froing, or to use the Greek, the
Mhm.
metaxu, an in between. You cannot have love if there isn't there's a distinction or there is enough epistemic or epistemological space between you and the person you are loving. There has to be that space, and well, there has to
Yeah.
be action.
Yeah.
I would like to, if it's okay, I'd like to move to the questions, the 4 questions you laid out for the last 25 minutes because I want to respect the time. Um, I want to say one thing about the first section. I just want to I really liked how you said something here about laboring to throw out and bury the precepts of men that are
Yeah.
often used as weapons against others, and then you cited the anti-Nephi Lehites. I really
Yep.
like that writing style. You alluded to burying weapons, and then you didn't explain what the anti-Nephi Lehites did, but you left
Yeah.
some good crumbs there in your
Yeah,
language. So
that's good.
I saw that. I
Yeah.
noted that.
So I know you want to get to the questions, but
Yeah.
this is important to
Okay.
me.
Let's. Yeah.
When
I
those
actually wanted to.
anti
I wanted to ask you about the anti-Nephi-Lehites, but I was worried about time. So if you're okay,
No, it's
I would
okay.
love. I want to
Uh,
hear you explain
we
the
can cram it in.
anti-Nephi-Lehites. Yeah, cram it in.
So when they made that covenant, they knew what they were doing.
hmm
They were self-applying a precept. So in ecology, we would say they were self-applying a constraint. We're going to bury our swords. They're stainless. We've been forgiven. We're going to bury them, and by burying them, that affords us an opportunity to now behave in a different way. We've cut off the old way. We're not going to go back to the way of gossiping and backbiting and character assassination and the other 50 things that Denver lays out. All that stuff's buried. We don't do that anymore. And because we don't do that, now we can look at the law of our master and
hmm
say, how do we behave? Right? And so as a community, the anti-Nephi Lehites, they had that in common. They all had to do that. To be part of them and have that name, they had to do that. When the people at the Waters of Mormon were baptized, they all knew the precepts of bearing one another's burdens, mourning with those that mourn, right? They knew the law that they were entering into, and they all self-applied those constraints, those precepts. Okay. King Benjamin's people, he gives his sermon, he gives a law, and it's all the same principles that are in the law of Christ, and they all join in covenanting to accept it. And what's the outcome? Their hearts are knit, right,
hmm
together. They're joined together. Well, we tend to think like, well, yeah, the Spirit worked upon them and it bonded them. And I think that's true. But what if it's also that they had common bonds, or in other words, common precepts on how their behavior and interpersonal conflicts were going to be worked out? Those were the bonds of love. Those were the
Yeah.
bonds of peace that bonded them together. They threw off the old bonds of slavery, of the carnal man, and they put on the bonds of Christ, the bonds of charity, which guide the behavior. So I
So I
think
want
that's
to.
really important to understand.
Yeah.
We've already done that. As a people, we've already covenanted to become one with all those who seek the Lord's righteousness. We already have that in common, but we just need to get to the point where we can talk about what those bonds are that we have in common.
Yeah.
So,
So I see, and I love how you shared. I don't. I can't see it in King Benjamin, but I see a pattern, a liturgical pattern in there. So you have the anti-Nephi-Lehites. They're burying. They're going underneath. That's a baptism motif. It's a death motif. Same with that the Waters of Mormon. And perhaps I'll have to reread King Benjamin. There's probably that element there, but there's this liturgical element. I also think of Paul on the road to Damascus. He gets blinded, and so he has this conversion going down type of experience. But he emerges out of that, and I think
so
he's
just to
blind.
interject,
Yeah,
I would say if you're looking at the liturgical element,
yeah,
they all take upon them the name of Christ.
yes, yes, because they're born again. Yeah.
Okay, they all take upon it,
So
right?
Paul
I
takes a new
desire that
name.
the people can come here so I can, yeah.
And then Paul at the
Uh,
same time, he's also blinded. And then he has to he has to become dependent and work with and become needy to the very Christians he was persecuting. If I know my history correct, yeah. So I want to bring the Orthodox perspective, and they're very keen on this. It was a paradigm of baptism that I haven't considered before. So a lot of baptism, I think, in our Western precept, we've kind of taken this religion thing to be very individualistic. It's my relationship with Jesus,
yep.
and in the end, it is your relationship with Jesus. It is you have to make the sacrifices, and no one else can do it, and you have to have that in your inner conviction. However, I think that precept gets taken to the extreme where we just made it this individual magic thing we do for our own sins. The Orthodox Church, if you want to get catechumen or I don't know the word, join their church, they will not let you get baptized till you've been part of their community for over a year. Because and you could that might be, we might say that's adding more or less, but here's their reasoning why is because they view baptism and the receiving of a new name as being part of a new family. And so it's
Yeah.
not just an individual thing for your salvation. There's this communal idea that after you emerge out of the waters of baptism, you are now part of this communal family. And so that's why they don't baptize you unless
So
unless they
would
know
you
you want
say
to be
that,
part of the family.
maybe part of the issue that we have is an identity issue,
Mm-hmm.
because a vast majority of us were baptized before the covenant was given.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the mind, there's a disconnect, even though scripturally and covenantally they're one and the same, they're not maybe understood that way. Because even if you look at Matthew's sermon in chapter 3, the first beatitude is about baptism.
Yeah. Blessed are they who believe in your words and they
Yeah.
come down to the depths of humility, be washed in immersion. Yeah.
Right. Think about when Christ came to Bountiful, he taught the doctrine, he taught the law, he ascended to heaven, and the very next day, what's the first thing that the disciples split up and taught? It was the
Exact same
law.
thing. The law, the exact same law.
It was the law.
Mm-hmm.
So these two are interrelated. Even the scripture that Paul says, "You are the temple of God. God's
Mm-hmm.
Spirit dwells in you." We take that in our Western mind to think, yes, I am the temple of God. That's not what Paul is saying. If you read it in context, he's saying, you as a member of this community are
Mm.
part of the temple of God.
That would make a lot
That's
more
how
sense.
Peter would say it.
Mm-hmm.
Peter talks about how the royal priesthood, and you're a building, the stones, it's all coming together. We all have a part to play, and the individualism, that's a false precept.
Yeah.
That's something that prevents us from forming the bonds and building a
Yeah.
community that we can
It's
have
a
peace in.
it's a false precept, but there's nuance in there because the individualism, there is a necessary element to it because sometimes we can swing into collectivism way too far, and history's done that. It's bad. I think the part we need to preserve from individualistic precepts is the self-responsibility. I am
Yeah.
responsible, and I need to take initiative and think for myself. I need to use my reason to communicate. That is, I think, the individual part we have to keep, but in respects to the community. I want to share a study with you about this idea of the body being the temple, not the individual, but the collective. Consciousness sounds weird, but I like to use the word distributive cognition. So back to the metaphor I shared earlier about the ship and governing, right? How
Yeah.
does a massive cruise liner actually steer itself? It's not just one single person. There's a captain, but there's a million people that are observing, making decisions, and moving the ship together, and they kind of become one, and they're able to govern together where they want to go. A lot of this is the science of 4E cognition or distributive cognition. This is how our brains work. That we're much more. There's a synergistic effect when we work together and we can tap into the collective cognition. So another example, this is really good. There's these puzzles that people will have to solve. One called the 9-dot problem. Have you ever seen it where you connect 9 dots with 4 lines?
Yeah.
Ever heard of the weights and selection task where you have to match up the certain cards to certain numbers and it's a really hard logic problem?
Mhm.
Well,
Haven't heard of that one.
yeah, there's multiples of these problems, and what they found, there was this task force called the Wisdom Task Force. They actually studied this in 2022, led by Igor Grossman, and a bunch of other cognitive scientists. One of the things they discovered that is when people try and solve it on their own, the success rate is about, I think it was 15 or 5 to 15%. But when you get 4 people together, and you have them talking to each other, the success rate goes up to over 85%. Now you may argue and say, one person knows the answer and then they're just telling everyone else. But when they observe it and what they watch, it is not one person coming up with the answer and compelling everyone and saying my way is right. It's this distributive we space, this collective cognition that occurs when people are in dialogue with each other. It's this, the logos emerges from the dialogos, what we were talking about off camera. And so that is why I believe why Denver is so keen on us learning how to reason one with another. So back to this ethic idea of what is good, and I shared earlier what is it good to be a lion? You have your teeth and you have your claws, right? What does it mean to be a good human? Well, what is the attribute that makes humans distinct from other animals? It's our ability to reason. It's not even our intelligence per se. It's our ability to have agency, to make a decision, to choose for ourselves. And the way you uphold and respect agency is through reason, which is that single attribute of reason is what virtue, long-suffering, patience, and gentleness, and love and faith is founded upon, that inseparably connects the rights of heaven to the priesthood. Because if I do not use reason to communicate with you, Tyler, if I'm going to be a bully and use my status or use my power or compulsion, or maybe I'll use a backdoor compulsory effect and tax you into poverty because I want your wealth. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Maybe we'll cut that out. But what I'm saying is that is going against reason. When you have to use compulsion, you are becoming like the animals because you are not acting in the good that's been placed upon man that makes us distinct. So when we use reason, we have to communicate, and then back to the Aristotelian ethic I talked about earlier. When I'm communicating with you, I can't treat you as less than me, nor can I treat you as some divine being. I respect you as a god in embryo, like me, another Christian, and I have to use reason to communicate with you because I respect your dignity and you respect mine, and there's that reciprocal thing based on reason. And I can only use the tools of long suffering, gentleness, persuasion, and love and faith. So, Chris,
I like that.
Why did I go on that rant? Sorry.
Well, how can we have the law of Zion or
Yeah.
the law of common among us if we're not equal?
Mm-hmm.
Equal in that we're allowed to be free of being compelled to go along with somebody else's thing, right? We are all free to choose, and that's what's so beautiful about this. We're all free to choose.
Yeah.
You know?
You are. Yeah, we're equal in our agency.
Yeah.
Our ability to choose. Yeah, and then the moment you have to take up arms, and that's why in Zion no one will take up arms. There is no
There's no need.
legislative government in Zion because the legislative branch is there for government, but there is self-governance where you can. Governance is different than government. Governance is being able to. I heard it described like this: there's a judicial branch and then there's a legislative. But there's this idea that in a Zion-like community, it's going to be more of a juridical tradition, meaning it's based on wisdom. It's kind of like Moses, and you know how Moses has the hierarchy, and there's 10 people, and they go up to 50, and yada yada.
Yeah.
When you have to work out your issues with 10 people, you're being guided by relationships and wisdom. You don't need some abstract muscular law to compel you to obey. You're in the moment. You're dealing with your conflicts with your brothers and sisters. You're in a group of 10, which is pretty much like what a fellowship is.
Yeah, I would say that the law of Christ abolishes civil law. If you think of civil law, it's unnecessary if everyone self-applies the law of Christ.
Which means every person has to, when they self-apply the law of Christ, every person has to take individual responsibility. That's the rub. That's the big major rub, and that's why that's the scary part, because you can't abdicate anything. You are responsible for every choice you make. You are accountable, as what Denver says in the first proverb when he connects agency and accountability. Yeah. Oh, that was do you have to go soon, Tyler?
I can go for a little bit longer. My wife's on a girls' day, so I have like kids coming in and out. I can go probably 20 more minutes.
Well,
Uh,
let's knock out these 4 questions then.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, let's
So what does this mean in practice?
what we're doing right
Um,
now.
so dialogue, reasoning together.
Well, right now we're using persuasion and long suffering. Although there hasn't been much suffering, this has been fun.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Ah,
we're discovering things that we have in common.
Mm-hmm.
We have common understanding. Now we might explain it a little bit different. We might come at it from different principles, but we have them as common things that
Mm-hmm.
are governing our behavior. And so kind of my hope is that more people will just embrace discussing the law of Christ. I think by bringing awareness to the law, uh, it'll help us shed the false traditions, the false ways of interacting, jockeying for position, trying to be the leader. We don't
Mm-hmm.
need we don't need a leader. We have Christ, okay?
Yeah.
And we have Christ's law, and we can have equality and freedom and love.
So what do you
So
think that the roadblocks? Let's get practical here. In covenant Christianity, what is preventing us from doing what we're doing right now?
yeah,
I can
Not you and
speak
me
to
in
that too.
particular, but broadly, like what's stopping people?
yeah, I want to hear from Adam.
Yeah, so I think I can speak to this because I am an observant type. I usually kind of sit in the corner, I just kind of watch. I've grown up in this for, a good, oh gosh, since 2014 or so. So yeah, 10, 11, almost 12 years for me. So that's the experience that I have, the background that I have, and just observing the way that the fellowships that my fellowship and other fellowships that I've been a part of and various conferences and gatherings that I've been a part of and so that's the background that I'm coming from. There does seem to be at least I'm not going to say that it is this way presently, but I think as far as I've observed it, there could still be some things to work out with it, but there is this idea of inequality. There is this idea of that some know more than others, and so they have status over others that don't know quite as much. Um, and I think that is dangerous, obviously, because any kind of inequality, will fester and not allow us to practice the law of Christ among us that we've covenanted to do. And so there are some that still harbor feelings feelings of envy, feelings of jealousy, for those that perhaps have spent more time trying to gain more knowledge, gain more insight, and trying to live it. And so there is a disconnect there that I've observed, um, both in my generation and in the generation above me, which is, my parents and who they fellowship with. And in, even in like friend circles and in fellowship wide and across the general, movement or the general body. So, I do think that inequality is one of the big ones that I've witnessed, and I think it stems from iniquity. I think it stems from this unbelief that so many have carried with them from the LDS tradition specifically, but also from others. It's definitely in a lot of other traditions that have found their way here. And so we just need to do away with that stuff. I think that setting out the law and then attempting to, I guess, educate everyone is educated on what the law is, and so that we can all take it in ourselves and then live it is what's happening right now. And I do think that I've seen a resurgence, actually in the past couple of weeks, the past couple of months within my own fellowships, where we've started to take it more seriously. We've started to dive into what this law is and attempt to live it and practice it with each other. And so I do think that it is being worked through, which is why I said I don't think that specific thing is something that I observe right now, but that it's still being worked through. And so that is one thing. Probably partly because I mean there is some truth to there being some individuals that heard the word first and then sought to then teach the word in their circles and in their communities, and so we're all here for a reason. We're all here because we heard it from somewhere, or we read it from somewhere, or some in some way we were led to this truth. And so we just need to do away with the idea that but we were led by this other thing here or this other person, and so we need to look to this for guidance or whatever. It's like, no,
Yeah,
it's
so
up to you individually.
I would
Yeah.
suggest the precept that could help us get out of that pit
Hmm. Yeah.
is seek ye first the kingdom of God. That is our
Mm.
only allegiance. It's not to Denver, it's not to any other seek ye first the kingdom of God, right?
Yeah.
Either he is the king that rules over us or not. So
Yeah. And I'd
that's
like to
exactly
speak.
what I was actually
It's a
going to
good
bring
one.
up, Adam. I was going to bring up the same thing as a barrier. So
And I want to talk about that barrier a little bit too, and I'm going to because I see that too. And what I'm getting at, Adam, there's this inequality, or perhaps even perceived inequality of people who are perceived as teachers or know a lot or got the information first, right? So it's very informational, or
Yeah.
even so. This is a very This is not a. This is a very interesting idea here. We talked about the 4 P's of knowing, how there's propositional knowing, that's the ideas and facts you know. There's procedural knowledge, how you know how to ride a bike, play a piano. There's perspectival knowledge, where you know what it's like to see the world from a certain vantage point. Then there's participatory knowledge. You know what it's like to be a husband and to be in relation like that. For John Vervaeke's 4 P's of knowledge, he makes a really interesting case in his video series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, that the West moved from these non-propositional ways of knowing, where they used to value the participatory. And by the way, all these 4 P's of knowing are linked to different regions in the brain, different memory centers, by the way. But the West used to value the non-propositional forms of knowing, the participatory sense, the perspectival knowing. And he kind of draws a correlation between the erosion of that value of participatory knowledge in religious space to the erosion of liturgy and ritual ways of knowing. We went to a culture that valued more and more, not just in religion when we had the written word and it became about the words on a piece of paper that we adhere to, or a book, but also in the sciences, in education. The entire Western culture went to this propositional straitjacket, he calls, where you now value the propositions. And so, what gains a high premium in a propositional culture would be someone who can be highly articulate and can explain the words and can teach all the ideas very, very well. And how does that look like in a religious place? It's the university lecturer who is going up to a pulpit. Contrary to contrary to a liturgical setting where they worship, where they get their sense of communion and worship through the ritual enactments. And so I see that. Hear me out. Like, I think a lot of that sense of inequality is because we are making value judgments from the wrong precepts, where we value articulated speech more than these other ways of knowing the gospel.
yeah,
How's that? Yeah.
we value the
Yeah.
word of knowledge, but we don't value the word of wisdom. We don't
The wisdom,
value
yeah.
the gift of healing or the gift of all the other gifts. There's a lot of other gifts. I think we value the word of knowledge or somebody who's very articulate because we came from a tradition that most people were not articulate about the gospel.
Yeah.
But we've got to move into a new phase of the experiential knowledge. Practical, how'd you put it?
I call it non-propositional. So
Okay.
there's propositional and there's non. Yeah, knowing by doing,
Well,
knowing by perceiving,
Yeah.
knowing
yes.
by
We've
being.
got to learn, and that's a lot more intuitive based. It's a lot more wisdom based than just knowledge, because I got to learn how to apply the teachings now,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Live them
Like,
out. Well,
yeah,
here's a pedagogical is how you teach. There's a point here, and I've explored Orthodoxy, and so I've noticed that their worship, they don't have a preacher preaching. They spend most of their 2 hour long, praying and chanting prayers while the priest blesses the Eucharist. And they have this form of worship where their idea of worshiping is, the way I describe it, is they are embodying the structure of reality by conforming to the ritual, versus the low church Protestants, where their idea of worship is, we're going to come hear someone speak to us. And
yeah.
so and there's a point here, like, you learn the mysteries of God not by academic rigor where you are reading a lot of books. I think you learn the mysteries of God by participating in them. There's this idea of the word mystery. It's knowing by participation. We think of mystery, you probably read this from Dave Butler. It's a Modern minds think it's a mystery novel that you read and solve a crime. But mysteries in the ancient sense were ordinances or practices that you participate in. And so I wonder if too much of our fellowship meetings still hold to this propositional way of knowing, where we're not practicing or praying, we're engaging in philosophy, and which has its
Well, and
place. But
we need to
yeah.
change our environment.
Mm-hmm.
Fellowships, we get to choose the kind of environment we want. We can sit down as a fellowship and ask, what are the precepts that are guiding the environment? Let's look at them. And if we want to change the environment, let's change the precepts. So for example, you could say, we always get together and so teaches. I want to suggest that, for the next 2 weeks when we get together, we're just going to pray. We're just going to sing. We're just going to sit quietly and contemplate on a passage.
Mm-hmm.
If you applied that as an experiment, what would happen to the environment? It would automatically change, and people would get a taste for something different. And then they might ask themselves, man, do we want to do this going forward? How can we add to this experience? What other precepts could we apply to improve the experience? So in May, that's what we did as a fellowship. We got out a whiteboard and we said, this is our fellowship. Here's our box, our sandbox. What are the boundaries of our fellowship? What do we want to do to create an environment that functions in Christ, right? And it's imperfect, but it has elevated our worship and our relationships. But it's because we challenged what we were doing intentionally.
Oh, yeah,
So
that's and so you're experimenting within bounds. I think.
yeah.
Yeah, that might be the lack of that. I do feel there's a slog of that. I haven't noticed it, that people. Can you tell me some practical things that you've done in your fellowship
So
to change the space?
Again, we suck, but
Yeah.
we know we suck, and we're trying to change the environment, and it is improving. We chose 4 little precepts that no one person put forward. It was a group effort. Different people volunteered them, and then we all, by common consent, the whole fellowship, 20 plus people, agreed these are the 4 precepts that are going to kind of guide our fellowship for the next little while. So one was that Christ is the chief cornerstone. When we meet, it needs to be focused on Christ. Another one was be one. If you're not one, you're not mine. That's a precept, right? We're going to try and make that an important part. Another one was we start, or how does it go? We intentionally do things to invite the Spirit into our meetings. So like when we talked about this, we talked about intentionally praying more, intentionally singing more, doing things to invite God's presence into the meeting. And then the last one, that we keep the covenant. right? We try to do and be what we need to be to keep the covenant. So those are like 4 boundaries for our little sandbox, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens in the sandbox is constrained by these 4 precepts. And this is just the model that we came up with.
Yeah.
But they act boundary markers, because before there was no boundary. It was just like, well, let's just do what we've always done. But by saying, no, this is what we intentionally, by common consent, we discussed this for weeks, and then we all voted, this is how we are going to set up our system. And then from there, once we actually used common consent, because it wasn't being used,
Mm-hmm.
now proposals come up and we can discuss and share and then vote, and it becomes something that adds to the experience. That's the idea. So,
Yeah. If you don't mind probing a little more, do you guys
but
have
as far
any
as the law of Christ, go ahead.
Oh, I was wondering if you had any
Go
more
ahead.
like are there so that's kind of the space you have. Do you have I'm really big on trying to figure out the non-propositional ways of knowing, because we do have that form of teaching, and
Yeah.
all types of knowledge is what can we articulate with our words. Do you have any practices that your fellowship does, or ways of praying, or
Yeah. So,
ways of communion?
I mean, a lot of it is probably stuff that you guys do.
Mhm.
I'll share something that I think is valuable. How many of you guys have been in meetings where somebody speaks and it's powerful and the Spirit convicts you? Man, what they just said, I agree. That's from God. And then the meeting progresses and a whole host of voices come and squash that out, and it's forgotten.
Mm.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what does God say? In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. That's a law. That's a precept. That's a law. That's how he works. So in a meeting, if one person stands up and says, hey, I think that we need to repent, we've been, kind of sloppy with tithes, and then another person feels convicted and they also witness, and this person is, little grandma, 80-year-old grandma in the fellowship that's very quiet, but she witnesses it. We've just seen dialogue
Mm-hmm.
with the Spirit of God. But what do we do with that? 2 people have witnessed to a truth. What do we do? So in our fellowship, we came up with a way to honor by saying, if we have this happen, to honor it, we're going to pause and we're going to ask them questions to gain more understanding. Then we're going to pray about it and try and get more understanding and direction. And then whatever happens from that point could potentially shift the direction of the meeting or the fellowship. So now in practice, we voted on that because we've had this happen multiple times over 10 plus years as a fellowship where
Mm-hmm.
this happened. I mean, sometimes it will happen every meeting where like the Spirit of God is with us and multiple people witness for this principle or this truth, and then we just move on, and we're denying God establishes his word. So by creating a path to honor his word, right, now it allows a new environment, because now that's a constraint. We've unanimously agreed as a fellowship, we're going to follow this. If this happens to us, this is what we're going to do, right? That's a constraint. That's a precept. So it allows God now to start working through that mechanism. Now,
You
in
created a space.
sharing that with you, we don't follow it perfectly, but we're aware of
There's
it.
flexibility in it. The way I see it scripturally is, God gathers dust from the earth and breathes spirit into it. And so in that original passage, we need to gather ourselves in a way. We need to create a body. We got to create something. I mean, we have to gather. so
Right.
that God can breathe into it. But we need to actually create a space. And if the space isn't working, maybe we're not building the correct body. We need to create a different space. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear
Yeah,
that you have.
and that's the
thinking
power of
about it.
common consent is by
Yeah.
common.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you're saying, through common consent, as a fellowship, we can decide how we're functioning. Every single person in the fellowship has an equal voice. It's not just the unspoken leaders. Every single individual has an equal voice to contribute and try to persuade where the fellowship's going, and then through common consent, right, create
Yeah.
new bounds. Now, in the context of the law of Christ, I don't personally think you can common consent the law of Christ, because it can be used manipulatively and it can be used to coerce people. It just needs to be more of a relational consent. Like between us, we all kind of have a common understanding that the law applies to us.
Mm.
It's kind of like a given already. We've made a covenant, we've entered into the covenant, and that law is now there for us to bind ourselves to, right? But it's an individual thing. So
Oh. Well, thank you, Ty. That's probably a good place. I want to respect your time.
yeah.
Good place to end on. Is it okay if Chris gives his quick scribe report just to kind of give us
Yeah.
a synopsis of what we talked about so it's fresh in our mind and then we can take this away and think about it?
Yeah.
All right.
All right, Chris, take it away, Mr. Scribe.
Hopefully I did a decent enough job on this. So
You always do.
yeah, I hadn't been scribing for probably the last 20 minutes or so, but I figured we were kind of touching on more. I reached like a natural nice stopping point, so I didn't want to spoil it any more than I did. So anyway,
Sounds good.
okay. How many of our interpersonal problems are because we have different operating principles running in the background? Everyone is so varied, and the central thing that unites us is the law of Christ. But we are all at different relationship stages with it. It takes full individual conversion to it for our operating principles to become aligned. Without this full conversion, our perceptions can be too varied for us to understand one another, or in other words, we fail to be of one heart and one mind. Having these flaws is a given for humans, but that's why God has given us a standard to judge ourselves by and bring us into enough humility, bring us all low enough to not be speaking over each other's heads. Christ gives us a precept, and it is up to us to accept and integrate it within ourselves. Our capacity to do so can grow or diminish based on the environments and constraints we exist in. We must understand how to use the constraints we have to leverage bringing forth good fruit. The precept can also change the environment itself, as it applies a constraint on how we engage with it, and that can bring forth transformative behavior. When we can govern ourselves properly, it can lead to reciprocal transformation of both environment and character. But the precepts must be held to, or else we can lead ourselves down destructive paths, destructive to both ourselves and the environment. One important precept is the one of reconciliation with our fellow brothers and sisters. It even takes precedence over personal worship, as broken connections can leak into sacred space if we don't take care of them, polluting the space. Before you can enter the Holy of Holies, you have to clean up the courtyard of the temple. Another example of how precepts can guide perception is something like Augustine reading Plato and comes to use his writing and views as justification for monarchical systems, which is a poor ethic in light of views of someone like Aristotle, who believed in the individual drive for knowledge and good. What is ethic? It is what you ought to do, determined by a guiding principle in a particular arena. The Northern Star at sea, the flag in Capture the Flag, the law of Christ within living as a Christian. And there are many arenas that exist that apply the law of Christ differently. A parent's love for a child has a proper method within the law of Christ, and the child's love for the parent has a different proper method. We must understand how the precepts of the law of Christ applies in all various arenas we find ourselves in, and how to repent if we find ourselves going off the path. A good example of abiding by a precept is the anti-Nephi Lehites who buried their weapons. They made an action that is a hard cutoff of past behavior and can then move into drastic transformation into living by the law of Christ. It wasn't just an individual effort, though. They had a shared bond in their action that strengthened their hearts and hold to the precept. Their example is one of a group, which is important to note. While our submission to the law of Christ must have our individual effort, it isn't an exclusively individual journey. We must make personal sacrifice. But for what? For who? God alone? Not just, but for our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ as well, which we must come to see everyone as. We must gain community to see all the things God has to show us, to understand all the precepts he wishes for us to live by. The Logos only emerges when there is more than just our individual selves. So gosh darn it, we need to learn how to get along and cooperate without compulsion. We don't need people stepping on each other's toes or heads. Christ is our leader. There's no need for any of us to get in his way. That's why we have the precept of common consent. That's all I got.
Yeah. How's that sound, Tyler?
Man, Chris, like, you had the hardest job of all of us. That was awesome, man.
Thank
That
you.
was really beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was
Now in our
awesome.
fellowship, we all take turns being the scribe for a given meeting. So
I've gotten it the most though.
but he's gotten it the
That
most 'cause he's
right
the best. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Tyler. That was thank you for taking the time for this conversation. It was edifying and I really enjoyed it. So
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Let's do it
Yeah.
again.
do
Maybe
you have any
next,
closing do you want
next
to have
time
any
if you
closing
guys
things?
want.
I'll
like-
give you the last word.
Yeah, I'd say, it would be really awesome just to have the covenant of Christ text of the sermon and just walk through it and ask what would change in the environment if we applied this, if we
Yeah.
applied this, if we applied this. That would be really fascinating. So
Yeah.
Thanks,
I
guys.
Yeah. I always like to give you the last word, but I would add to that covenant of the law of Christ thing, our fellowship. We really try and read it before we partake of the sacrament every single time. Not necessarily to engage in philosophical discussion about it, but to just let it sink in and reflect before we partake of the sacrament. And we've made that into a sort of liturgical practice, having a liturgical, almost imaginal reading, you can say, of the text, contemplative reading, and I think, Adam, that has unified us and been deeply moving for our fellowship. So add
awesome.
to that as well.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you, Tyler. God bless you, and thank you for meeting with us. Hopefully, we can talk again in the future. So, if you have any insights
All
or
right,
you write things, send them my way. You have my email now. So,
Okay. Awesome.
awesome.
Nice to meet you guys.
Yes.
You guys take care.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey,
Good to meet